I was Prime Minister at the time of September the 11th. I took the decision that we should support America and the nations from all around the world in removing the Taliban from government there because they were sheltering Al-Qaeda, who were responsible for the 9/11 attack, and were not prepared to yield them up. We've had 20 years of, immense difficulty, but also real progress. And I think the problem was that in the end, with these situations, you've got to be prepared to commit for the long term. And I know how difficult it is to do that. But the truth is, when we came to the end of 2019, we were in a situation where troop levels were significantly down. America had a few thousand troops. NATO had something like 8,000 troops. The country could have been helped through the next phase of its progress. But then we decided, for political reasons, that we had to withdraw under the previous American administration and then under this one. And even though I understand how difficult these things are, if it matters, and I think Afghanistan did matter and does matter to us, you've got to be prepared to hold to your course over the long term and to see it through, even though it's difficult and even though it's painful, because it matters to our security, as well as, of course, to the people of Afghanistan.
20 years on, looking at the situation in Afghanistan now, and it's going backwards, do you regret going in at that time if you think now it looks like not much has really changed for the people of Afghanistan? I
think it's important to realise when you talk to Afghans, and I've talked to some in the last few days, I mean, there actually in this last 20 years has been a lot of progress. I mean, when you think of the economy is about 3 times the size it was 20 years ago. This year, there would have been roughly 200,000 Afghans going to university, of which 50,000 were women. You know, if you look at the education system and how it's changed, and remember, the majority of Afghans have grown up not under the Taliban. It's a young population. Now, I think the story's not over for Afghanistan, and it's very clear to me, speaking to people, that there will be a real desire on the part of the people in Afghanistan, many of them, if they can, to change what has happened. But this was not a situation we needed to be in. The truth is, we were making progress, and the decision to withdraw, which really began with the agreement of February 2020 under the previous American administration, that decision was taken essentially for internal American reasons, which I understand. I mean, I completely get it. But we didn't need to do it for the success of the mission in Afghanistan. We could have held firm and we could have succeeded.
Imbecilic is the word that you've used to describe it. But there is obviously a feeling from a lot of world leaders that they just wanted out of it after 20 years, the money and the lives that were lost.
Yeah, look, I support a lot of what President Biden has done since becoming president. I mean, I have a great respect and admiration for him as a person. And I understand he inherited this agreement of February 2020, which was very difficult. And I also understand if you're a political leader, you're under political pressure, people want the engagement to end. But we've got to realize we were in a situation where our engagement was dramatically different from where it was 10 years ago, never mind 20 years ago, and where we could have managed the situation. And the problem with what's happened now, and this is my worry, is that it's not just about the Afghan people and our obligation to them. And obviously, you know, you feel, I mean, distressed when you see people realizing what they're going to lose as a result of the Taliban coming back into power. But it's not just about the Afghan people, it's about us and our security. Because you've now got this group back in charge of Afghanistan. They will give protection and succor to Al-Qaeda. You've got ISIS already in the country trying to operate at the same time. You know, you look around the world and the only people really cheering this decision are the people hostile to Western interests.
Do you think inevitably that Britain and its allies will end up back in Afghanistan because of what you've just said?
I can't tell. The one thing I know is right now the most immediate thing is that, and Britain can do this as the head of the G7 at the moment, we should be putting together the leading countries who are part of this coalition in the first place and who've supported Afghanistan the last 20 years. And we need to work out what our strategy and tactics are going to be in respect of the Taliban government. And we need to be drawing up a list of incentives and sanctions and other things that we can do in order to use the leverage we have, which is not insignificant. I mean, remember, this is an Afghan government that's been receiving large amounts of aid from the US, from Japan, from the UK, from other countries. The Taliban will find that governing is a lot harder than they thought. The population of Afghanistan is different. It's not going to just be prepared to go under some form of horrific, 7th century laws and practices. So there's going to be a lot that we can still do, but it's important that we mobilize now, after the disarray, frankly, of the last few weeks, that we mobilize as the leading countries and make it clear that we still understand we have an obligation in our own interests to try and resolve this situation and to put as much pressure on the government in Afghanistan as possible to make sure that we don't end up either with a security threat back in play for us or with the Afghan people losing the gains they've made over the last 20 years.
Have you spoken to Joe Biden recently?
No, I haven't. But, as I say, I have an enormous respect for Joe Biden. I've known him for many, many years, and he's a good man, he's a decent man. And I understand that once this agreement of February 2020 was entered into, it became, difficult. But on the other hand, by the way, the agreement of February 2020 made by the previous American administration with the Taliban, it was conditional on changes of behavior by the Taliban. And they broke the terms of that agreement, literally without any compunction whatever. So I think it's important to realize this is not something we needed to do. Again, I understand the political pressure, but our footprint in Afghanistan had really been reduced to a much, much smaller level. And as I say, by the end of 2019, we were in a situation where we could have held firm for some considerable time and helped the Afghan people through the next stages of their progress.
I saw it described as a stain on the West this morning. We really can't take a moral high ground about global issues like Yemen, for example, Hong Kong, if what's going on in Afghanistan, people falling from planes, babies being passed by desperate parents to soldiers who may never see their children again.
I think part of the problem is that over the last 20 years, we've heard all the bad news out of Afghanistan, and I don't think there was a lot of knowledge until literally these last few weeks amongst our own public opinion that yes, there had been real difficulties, and all the time it's tough because you've got the Taliban with external support always trying to sabotage progress, blow up roads and bridges, assassinate people who are trying to do good things in Afghanistan. So it was a very tough time over this 20 years, but I think it's only in the last few weeks when you read the really heart-rending accounts by people of what they fear under the Taliban, that you realize that there were a lot of gains in this last 20 years. And so I think the problem is that the West has to understand that when we do something like this, the signal it sends out is one of inconstancy. It's one that says, look, if the going gets tough, we're out. But you can't, in the world that we have today, you've got sometimes to commit for the long term. And you've got to commit for the long term because you made a strategic assessment of your interests. And because, yes, even if it becomes unpopular from time to time in public opinion, your job then as a leader is to go out and explain why it's necessary, despite that, to hold firm. Because when you don't hold firm, then those people who are opposed to you, whether these Islamist groups or Russia, China, Iran, all of whom will move into the vacuum we've created, those people who are not on our side and who don't wish us well are going to gain by it.
Realistically, could Britain have done anything else? Given that the US said, look, we are not going to support you. Britain didn't really have any other choice, did it?
Well, we couldn't stay there without the American support. And I don't know enough about what internal conversations there have been, but certainly my view is we should have been, and maybe we were, so I'm not criticizing anyone, but we should have been arguing very strongly as to why this was the wrong thing to do.
Whether you like it or not, it is part of your legacy. What would you say to the soldiers who we've heard from this week that have been horrifically injured in Afghanistan, and the widows of soldiers who have died, and they're saying, well, there was no point to this, was there? They went to fight a war that was completely pointless, and it's going back to how it was.
Look, our troops were fantastic in Afghanistan, and a lot of them made the ultimate sacrifice. A lot of them were injured. And it's really important that they know that this wasn't a hopeless endeavour, and it wasn't a bad cause. It was a good cause. You know, we went there because we had a state of Afghanistan turned in to a state that was run by an extremist Islamist group that were harbouring people who were carrying out attacks, you know, like the 9/11 attack, and who were providing support for terrorist groups around the world. We went in there for very good reasons, and we achieved a lot thanks to those British and American and other armed forces over the last 20 years. And what I'd say to them is the sacrifice was not in vain. Those 20 years, by the way, matter. You know, what we achieved in Afghanistan, it matters today. I actually spoke yesterday to an Afghan general who himself was fighting the Taliban just literally days ago. And he said, you know, do not forget, we made huge progress during those 20 years. My generation has grown up knowing something different from the Taliban, and we're determined at some stage and in some way to get our country back. So I think it's really important that people realize that the story of Afghanistan and the story of the Taliban takeover, it's not over. It's tragic what's happened. I think it's unnecessary. I think we made a serious mistake in doing this in this way, but it isn't over yet.
Given what we found out about Dominic Raab's actions or inaction over the last week, should he still have a job? Should he still be Foreign Secretary? You know,
I'm just concentrating on what I think we should do now as a country. I don't really want to get into individual actions of government ministers. And frankly, it's really not a question of where anyone was at any particular time. It's a question of what we do now.
But it's about taking responsibility, isn't it? And, you know, we found out that the Minister for Afghanistan, he was on his holidays, Dominic Raab was on his holidays, and you need people to be present in a crisis.
Well, you need people to be contactable, certainly, and active during a crisis. But I don't want to, you know, there's plenty of people commenting on that. That's not the purpose of writing what I did. What I wanted to do was to say two things. First, in the immediate term, this is what we need to do, and I've suggested that Britain convene this contact group, and you've got to get the allies operating with a sense of coherence and purpose and direction, and that is very, very urgent to do. And the second thing is just to say in a more reflective way, we in the West have got to decide, is this radical Islamist threat a threat that we think warrants a strategic long-term commitment by us to defeat it? Now, I happen to think that it is. If we don't think that, that's fine. But I'm looking around the world today and, you know, I'm just seeing that this Islamist threat is still there. These groups are still proliferating. There are many different parts of the world getting destabilized by them. And I personally think we have an interest, Britain, the United States, our allies, in pushing back hard against this threat. Now, that doesn't mean to say you're always going to be doing, you know, full-scale conflict and so on, but it does mean to say that you take a long-term strategic view of your interests and how to satisfy them. And that really was the purpose of what I'm writing, because many people, as a result of what's happened in Afghanistan, are going to have a deep doubt as to whether we can be relied upon. And that is not a good thing. Your friends should have confidence, and your foes should always be worried. And the trouble with this decision is that our friends are now anxious, and those people opposed to us feel heartened by it, and that is not a good place to be. We can recover it, but it's going to require us actively to do it.
Are you hoping by using words like imbecilic, very strong language, that people will listen, that it won't just get lost in the commentary of what's going on?
That word was attached to the slogan, and it's a slogan that's been used by people of all political stripes in the US, you know, forever wars. And the reason I don't agree with the slogan is that first of all, it's not that you're not in Afghanistan in the same way that you were 10 or 20 years ago. You know, we had a manageable situation. We could have carried on managing it and helping the country. But it's also because in the end, and as I say this despite I've got a huge respect for Joe Biden as a president and as a person, a policy can't be decided by a slogan. It's got to be decided on the basis of a strategy. And that's a different thing. And that's really the purpose of what I was saying. You've got to, political slogans are one thing for campaigns, but when you're looking at the long-term interests of your country, when you've got a position of leadership in the world, it's important that you take a step back and you really analyze deeply what is in the interests, not just of your country and its allies, but in the interests of your own values.
I just wanted to ask finally, you're obviously in touch with people in Afghanistan. Do they get a sense that people actually care? Or do they think like you said, they can't rely on people anymore and they're going to be forgotten and left to it with the Taliban suppressing women's rights? I mean, that's a kind way of putting it. Children being denied education and anyone who goes against them is murdered.
I think people in Afghanistan, they've been through so much in the last decades. Remember we had one of the really sad things about Afghanistan is if you get some old pictures out from the 1960s of Afghanistan, you'll see it was a country that had a real future, a moderate country. And unfortunately, they've had literally almost half a century of difficulty and hardship. But there is a group of young people today who've tasted some of the freedom in the last 20 years, and I think they will find a way to reassert themselves. And I think what we've got to decide now is, and we should do this on a coordinated basis with the key countries coming together, is what can we do to help and support them? And yes, of course, a lot of Afghans at the moment will feel that they've been betrayed, but I think it's possible for us to show in time, because we do have some leverage in this situation, that we still have a sense of obligation to them and to our own strategic security interests and can help, and we should.
Go back 20 years, would you do it again?
Well, I've no doubt at the time it was the right thing to do, because if you have a terrorist attack killing 3,500 innocent people in the United States of America, and it comes out of a country run by an extremist government harboring the people who carried out that terrorist attack and would carry out then more terrorist attacks if you allowed them to carry on doing so. Look, we felt at the time, and I believe rightly, that there was no alternative but to say to the Taliban government at the time, you either give up the al-Qaeda leadership or we're going to remove you from government. So the point is, this could have turned out differently, and it should have. And I'm not criticizing people in a foolish way. I know how difficult it is to take these decisions. We made mistakes. A lot of mistakes have been made, but the fact is the country did have a chance. And it was really our own internal short-term politics in the West that has driven, in the last couple of years, us to put at risk what we gained. And I think it's only now that we're realizing in this moment of crisis exactly how much we gained and how foolish it is to lose it.